Welcome back. As Congress gears up for the debate over funding the government, a so-called Plan B is being met with major complications from the House of Representatives. Members of the far-right House Freedom Caucus are demanding that any short-term bill cut federal spending at a limit higher than a deal that was brokered by House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and President Biden back in the spring. They're also demanding new controls at the southern border and to put in place restrictions on prosecuting former President Trump. But even if any of those demands pass the House, they would, of course, be dead on arrival in the Senate. That puts McCarthy in a bind, as he can only afford a handful of defections on any bill that does not have Democratic support. Joining us now, communications strategist and former aide to House Speakers Ryan and Boehner, Brendan Buck. He is now an MSNBC political analyst. Brendan, good to see you. Seems like Kevin McCarthy is about to have a really bad month. And let's get into it. Let's start with this one on the spending bill. Talk to us about this plan here by the far right. I mean, as we noted, not really going to go anywhere, can't get through the Senate. How do you see this playing out? What can McCarthy do to placate those Republicans?
Yeah, that's the important question. I think the answer is probably nothing. And I think you have to keep that in mind as you go through all of this. You know, when we're ultimately funding the government, the likelihood that the Freedom Caucus is going to support anything is very low. That doesn't mean you can completely ignore them if you're the speaker, of course, because those are the people who are trying to threaten his job. I think the big picture we have to remember is that there was an agreement earlier this year between Congress and the White House to set spending levels, and that should have allowed for a bipartisan process to fund the government. The Senate is actually keeping to that deal. The House, pushed by the conservatives, have decided to ignore that deal, and that's where all of the trouble is coming from. Now, we are a long way from being able to figure out how to fund the government for the long term. That's why I find this shutdown threat so confusing, because we don't have a bill to fund the government yet. Even if they do demand certain things, there's no legislation ready to do that. This is just supposed to be a short-term measure to allow more time to write bills. And I know that's getting in the weeds and boring Congress stuff. But if you have a shutdown right now, I think you can expect another shutdown later in the year, both because we haven't done laid the groundwork to actually fund the government, but also because these conservatives, again, are asking for things that just have no chance of happening.
So a quick two-parter here. What is the likelihood, you think, of a short-term bill getting through? And then secondly, in order to get something done, is McCarthy going to have to offer these hard righters perhaps an impeachment inquiry into the president, which is something they want?
Yeah, it's hard not to look at the impeachment inquiry as something related to the spending measures. I think he knows that he's going to have a lot of disappointed conservatives, and so he's trying to point them in the direction of the impeachment. All of the short-term spending measure questions are clouded by the fact that they want to add funding for Ukraine and the recent disasters in the United States to that bill. I think the House is likely to send something over to the Senate that ignores Ukraine. That has become a flashpoint for a lot of conservatives. Donald Trump is likely to be railing against any more money for Ukraine. But the Senate has been acting in a bipartisan way the entire time. Senate will probably send a bill back to the House that funds the government for a short period of time, funds FEMA, funds Ukraine, and at that point, Kevin McCarthy is going to have a really tough decision to make. He could pass that very easily in the House. It will just require bringing it up and letting Democrats help get it over the finish line, and that's always a tricky proposition for a House Republican speaker. Rely on Democrats to pass your agenda, but I don't really see any other way to get this done, and I imagine that's where we'll end up at the end of the month.
Yeah, some tricky days ahead for the speaker. Let's switch gears here. Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis of late have both been campaigning on their COVID-19 response. Tell us about that particular moment, and certainly the COVID response is being viewed very differently in the Republican base than perhaps the country writ large. How are they each trying to accomplish this?
Yeah, Ron DeSantis made his name in conservative circles mostly around COVID. I would argue that his response to that, which drew a lot of ire from a lot of people at the time and made him an enemy of a lot of people, which, as you know, the currency in the Republican Party is who your enemies are. COVID was, I think, what put him on the map in Republican politics. And so Ron DeSantis, I think, is trying to press that advantage. And I think it is one of the biggest weaknesses that Donald Trump faces among the Republican electorate. The shutdowns that occurred while he was president. Obviously, we know that empowering Dr. Fauci is one of the most unpopular things you could do as a Republican. And Donald Trump is could be put on the defensive there if people were willing to take that to him. Of course, the COVID numbers ticking back up have allowed that issue to come back into the conversation. And I imagine not just Ron DeSantis, but a lot of the other contenders are going to try to remind people that it was under Donald Trump that some of the most restrictive measures were put in place. Whether it's going to be enough, I doubt it, but at least it's something that they can work off of.
Hard to imagine that was largely common sense safety measures have become such a political flashpoint among Republicans, but that's where we are right now. Communication strategist and former aide to House Speakers Ryan and Boehner. Great stuff from Brendan Buck. Thank you for joining us this morning.